everybody. I am Dr. Richard Day, and this is the Chiro Business Mojo podcast. Thanks so much for joining us. If this is your first time, please check it out. I think you're going to like what you hear. And if you do, please check out our other episodes. There's a lot to learn about business, and that's the whole purpose of this podcast, is the business side of chiropractic, the marketing side of chiropractic. And today, we're going to dig into the business side, and we're going to have someone who's an expert on billing and coding. And I can hear the groans, but that's okay. This person is really good. She's entertaining to listen to. Great stories and experience from out in the field with so many chiropractors. And one of the nice things about her experience is she can tell you ways you can get paid. Make sure you get paid what you're worth in the field. So it's going to be worth your time. And her name is Kathy Mills Chang. And since about 1983, she's been helping chiropractors with hands-on training to help them in their financial performance is really what it is. But a lot of that is wrapped up in knowing how to properly bill and code. She's a certified medical compliance specialist. Can I talk today? Probably not. And certified chiropractic professional coder and a certified clinical chiropractic assistant. So a CA with certification, which is pretty cool. She's the founder and CEO of KMC University, the chiropractic reimbursement and compliance experts. It's not just her, it's a whole team. The team has about 20 people in it, 20 plus, I think it is, and they effectively assist providers and teams with increasing their revenue and reducing their risk. And I can tell you this is true because I've used her a number of times. Great services, great people, great organization. So without further ado, let's introduce Kathy Mills Chang.
Thank you so much, Dr. Day, for inviting me.
Well, thanks so much for being on. I always love chatting with you, usually at your seminars, but I'm really pleased to welcome you to the Chiro Business Mojo podcast today. And, in reading over that bio before I announced it, I started thinking back to something I heard you say one time when I was in one of your seminars, and you were talking about how you were a CA. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, I actually started in chiropractic as a CA. I worked for a doctor that the office was he and his wife and one other person who kind of did the billing. And just, for reference sake, that was 1983. So billing was quite a bit different back in those days. But essentially, the story is that I had finished at Arizona State University, and my brother owned an x-ray company. And he had installed this x-ray machine in this new office. There was some sort of a, friendly bed of some kind that it required that they go out to dinner, and they got talking about how they were looking for somebody because their CA was pregnant. And I was looking to change the job that I was at. I said, well, why not? Let's try this. And ended up working there. And the person was supposed to go off on maternity leave after about 6 weeks. And lo and behold, she left a week later. So I got thrown into the pit of the fire and learned everything I could possibly learn largely on my own. And it was a very straight chiropractic office back in the day, 300 visits a day, Insurance didn't care in those days, of course, so it was pretty straightforward, just adjustments. But over the 6 years I was there, we grew into quite a large institution, multiple offices. And then after adopting our son, I wanted to work a little bit less. And so ended up, one of the doctors that was primary there left on his own, and I went and helped him get started. And then our family moved from Arizona to New York. And by this time, I'm now teaching some classes for Activator around the country and kind of, getting pegged for things that were local insurance things because I was a resident expert, for the lack of a better word, and largely ended up in moving to New York, which was a big drastic change for us. My husband at the time was moved to West Point. Ended up getting a job at the largest chiropractic group practice in the state. So while I was a CA, I really was a practice administrator because it was a huge institution, many, many offices, like 50 plus associates. It was a family of dad, sons, daughters-in-laws, and then all of these associate doctors. So I kind of centralized and ran that place. And then another move took us to Washington, D.C., where I went to work for the ACA. And that's when I kind of shifted a bit into a little more seminar teaching, learning directly from Medicare, learning directly from the AMA. So I guess I was still a CA then too, but kind of moved into more of a true administrator kind of purpose, and have been coaching from there until I opened KMC University.
Well, and that leads me right to my next question. So I've sat in some of your seminars and you've talked about it, but for those that don't know, what is KMC University?
So we are we call ourselves a consulting firm, but essentially we're an online university so that we're easily accessible. But we house the largest compendium of training available in the profession in the areas of reimbursement and compliance. So largely things like documentation, coding, Medicare, HIPAA, OIG compliance, of course, patient finances, things of that nature. And we're the largest team of certified specialists. What really sets us apart is that those who work with our clients are certified in some healthcare certification around reimbursement and compliance. So you're not hearing somebody's opinion. We have to clearly give the right information. And we have a proven process. And our proven process is, maybe set apart from some in that you can certainly just be a part of a membership where you have access to our resources and a help desk, or we can actually be the professional eyes and ears of doing evaluation and reporting on what we're finding and make recommendations and assist with helping with implementation. I think a lot of doctors, especially in the hustle bustle of today's world, tend to go and just learn something and go, fine, let's do it. And then it's the implementation piece that never gets all the way across the line, so the problem never really gets fixed. I always liken it a bit to chiropractic, where, I come in for 2 visits and wonder why my chronic neck is not feeling better, because it's not implemented yet. We haven't done the process of getting it where it needs to be. And the same thing happens on the business side, frankly. And, we have time poverty, we have money poverty, and unfortunately those things affect the ability for many offices to be able to actually correct the subluxations of their business.
So you're talking about the people that, you have the library that's online, and then people that are qualified that are on your team. So in addition to the library and, the emails you answer and the calls you get, are you performing in-house audits as well?
We do. So we offer a series of services that are analysis type services. One of our more popular is just a 3-chart review, which is essentially a proactive audit in a safe environment. So someone who is a certified auditor reviews the 3 charts in a baseline kind of fashion. Not a full baseline audit. That should be 5 to 10 charts if you're really going to be implementing compliance, but just a safe white hat audit, as we call it. And they will look at it as though they are the auditor for the, insurance company, Medicare, whomever. And we provide all of the findings along with why it's not okay, with actual snips from the documentation. And it allows a doctor to kind of be trained while they're looking at it, along with the material that we would suggest they work on. So if it's an initial visit issue, for example, maybe they're just missing it on the history section of that initial visit. And consistently through all 3 charts, this happened. We can kind of point that out, talk about what should have been there. We work with doctors who are sometimes in trouble with their boards. We do board monitoring. And what some other auditors will do is go, hey, this is wrong. This is not compliant. But they don't say why, and they don't say how to fix it. I think that's where we really set apart with the implementation piece. Another one that's very popular is our practice performance profile, where we kind of do what I liken unto a exam in x-rays and history, of an office, where we will literally ask 181 questions across all of these topics. We perform a risk assessment on the OIG side. We do a full coding audit, look at a year's worth of code usage. We look at a year's worth of reimbursement trends and 3 years worth of statistics. And the report that we produce tends to be 25 to 30 pages of solid information. The first 6 or 8, we try to synopsize the most important things. But it really helps an office to, just like an x-ray or an exam would do for a patient, to go, here's where there are issues. These are level 1 issues. Here's how we'd suggest you work on them. And doctors, this has been now 11 years that we've been doing this. We have never even one time performed this service where the doctor did not find in missed opportunities and money left on the table, literally, in most cases, 50 to 100 times the amount of money they spent on the evaluation.
Wow.
And it's something that most people go, well, geez, that's a no-brainer. And we still look at doctors and say that, and they go, well, I don't know. I don't get it personally, but I just know the ones who actually go through with it find amazing things that happen.
Yeah, I think most of us realize that documentation is important for a variety of reasons, but I don't know if everyone's aware how much money they're leaving on the table when they're not doing things right, and paying attention. And I know doctors are busy because so many of us are self-employed that it's hard to wear every hat, very well. But yeah, absolutely. I don't know if people are paying attention enough to know that it is costing them money. I think they're just realizing, oh, well, my notes are good enough, or they're thinking, I could always be better in documentation. Who couldn't? But they're not understanding that there's a financial implication as well.
And it's actually the two things that we focus on here, and that's risk and opportunity. So our job is to help doctors really minimize their risk. And frankly, the number one risk in the profession right now is HIPAA, because so many people now take it for granted because it's just been around for so long, but they haven't properly conducted the annual risk assessments. And with all of the hacking and all of the information's around even identity theft and the stuff that happens, the most vulnerable point of the practices today are HIPAA. And in certain states, there's about a dozen states in the country where the rules for that type of thing are more stringent than the rules for healthcare. It's crazy.
Oh,
so,
wow.
Like for PHI. So that's another thing that we really have a nice system of do it yourself or do it with our help for HIPAA updating and training. In fact, that's what I'll be speaking on at the Parker seminar this month in Las Vegas. We'll be going over that information because it's so incredibly critical. Interesting to your point, I think that as business owners, including myself, we're a team of about 30 who, we're a decent sized business, where you're running so fast that when there's enough, like when it's enough and things are like, okay, the bills are getting paid, everything's good, we're not in debt, you kind of go, everything's okay, and then a shift happens. And in chiropractic, it could be an insurance changes or, a factory closes down in your town or something. And then all of a sudden, you've got to start looking for the nickels and pennies. And that's when you find out, well, geez, I've been leaving all these nickels and pennies this whole time. Where could I have been if I would have just been paying attention? And to your point, what do you do? How do you even know? It's another one of our mantras in talking about KMC University is you don't have to know everything. You just kind of have to know someone who does. So another great feature of our company is you don't even have to be our member. You can purchase an hour of time with a specialist and solve a problem if you don't care to, be working on a bigger situation. The majority of our memberships are month to month. We don't house people into long-term situations because we know some people want to fix it and forget it, and I get it. But we are kind of that resource that's always there when you need us.
Well, you mentioned HIPAA, and then we did talk notes as well. Let's get back to notes for a second because you guys look at a lot of them. Are there particular things that you see over and over and over, across the country in these practices that docs are getting wrong?
Oh, we could go on for 2 days on that because there's so much of it. But I think I could probably synopsize it down to a few things to look at that I think if we understood those concepts, the rest of it would fall together. And one of them really is mistaking the format of a daily note with the format of the initial visit of that episode of care. So we know that not everyone's a new patient, but you could have an existing patient that returns after a period away and starts a new condition or begins treating under even the same condition or exacerbation. Those initial visits of those episodes look and should look different from what a simple SOAP note looks like. And the biggest mistake that we see doctors making, whether it's their software that is, unfortunately not able to kind of guide them in this fashion or whether, they're forced to remember it themselves, there is so much to what we call an evaluation and management visit, which are those initial visits, that is beyond just simple SOAP that they get them confused. Therefore, we don't have enough meat on the bone of that initial visit to warrant the care that's being delivered in the routine visits, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So by missing the components of what those are, and I am so old school, like I like to make things as simple as I possibly can. So for me, it's always about either or. If I can narrow things down for doctors into it's this or that, it's not 57 choices, it's this or that. This is one of those either ors. Am I about to walk in and document an initial style visit or E&M style visit, or am I documenting a routine visit within an episode of care, or even maybe maintenance care or something that is not clearly this evaluation and management or E&M style visit? Once you make that decision, now you can know what your requirements are and how they're different. And Medicare in particular expects that those initial visits will look and feel different and have more detail than the simple, very simple, straightforward SOAP note. Because a routine visit within an episode of care, frankly, could take you 90 seconds. It's so quick and easy what you need. But that initial visit is going to require more meat on the bone. So that's probably the biggest mistake we see, that if we could just help them solve that, what a difference it would make. And a lot of people know I work with ChiroTouch, and that's why I insisted that those templates look the way they do, because I want the doctor to be prompted. Nope, fill all this in. And a lot of different companies offer templates like that. And if they use electronic health records, you should look for those templates and try to fill them in according to the type of visit that you're using.
Well, you're making me feel pretty good about my own notes and my own practice, because I can tell you that those daily notes I do them fairly quickly. I'm also a ChiroTouch user, and I use the macros that your team and you put together. But I do spend much more time on that initial visit, because I do have I am trying to set that up right. And I don't know if I'm overreacting, but I feel like I have to justify everything that I'm doing practice, not only for me, but really for the benefit of my patient, that I'm not providing the care I need to if I can't say why I'm doing those things. And I'm also trying to make a case for getting my patient reimbursed, which they want as well. So I can really relate to what you're saying, because I find that true in practice for myself. But the majority of my time is on that initial encounter.
That's so smart. And I think that that's really a great guideline for doctors to just think about, because one of the biggest missing pieces, even of just that initial visit, is the treatment plan. I was just auditing one of our clients that I happen to have had to take over for, which I don't really coach a lot of people anymore, but this was one that I wanted to work with. And he'll send me in notes, or we use a secure file share system, and he'll just send a new patient, right? So then I just take it out, I print it, I hand audit it. So I put all the notes everywhere, scan it back in, and put it in our secure file. And what I found in this last batch that I looked at just yesterday is when the treatment plan is not robust, in which case there were some challenges because we're still early in the process, those routine visits cannot stand because we never told what we plan to do. So for example, where a doctor might say in a routine visit, treating per treatment plan, and there's no treatment plan on visit one, now you've ruined two visits, right? Neither one of them will be considered medically necessary.
Well, I got a question here. I'm going to shift gears, because we're talking about, reimbursement, and obviously Medicare are the big dogs, the head honchos, when it comes to that sort of thing. And I was recently out in DC on Capitol Hill, helping to lobby for expansion of chiropractic as it relates to Medicare. So, right now they're just paying for the 3 codes, the chiropractic manipulative therapies, but things like exams aren't covered, and modalities, and so on and so forth. But this didn't happen to me, but some of the lobbyists that went in had a copy of the OIG report sitting on the desk. And what they said was, well, if you want an expansion of your rights, why are you guys so bad as a profession? I mean, are things really as bad as they're saying?
So I have mixed feelings about that myself, and I'll tell you why. We tend to see the more ugly side, because people are coming to us because they are in trouble. We get the rare few, which I so appreciate, that are proactive and say, hey, I want to make sure I'm doing this right. I don't want to be in trouble. Because I believe in my heart that when you do that proactively and you begin working on something, and you can begin to show a paper trail of correction, that should there be a problem, it has been my experience in audits and whatnot that I've participated in, that there's a leniency where possible that is afforded because they can see that you're not the droid they're looking for, right? You're trying and you're fixing it. Doesn't mean you might not have been paid for something you shouldn't have, in which case that may need to be corrected. But they're not going to think you're fraudulent. I don't know if you saw the recent pharmacy thing that came down recently. We just put out a news item about it where there was over $300 million fined for this large pharmacy. I don't remember which one it was off the top of my head, but it was because they said you committed fraud by continuously submitting wrong information. And they're saying, but wait, we didn't know. And they said, but you should have known, and you didn't.
Mm-hmm.
So in that regard, I believe that our profession, because we work outside of chiropractic as well, but our profession is so unique in that it is by nature rebellious and different and so forth, which is the things we embrace and love about it. But these are the kinds of things where we are crammed into that healthcare round hole that require us to be the same as others. And most of the doctors think, well, I'll just see what happens. So it's bad. I mean, there's no doubt. Now, the OIG reports absolutely pull out the worst in people. There's no doubt. We have a client who was one of those OIG reports because they come out and they, pull your pants down, show you everything, put the names and all that. So we, of course, know it was our client. And it was our client long before he was our client, clearly. But one of the interesting things was that in working with him in his practice and all of them, going through it, when you look at what the documentation was for the years that they reviewed, which was back in 14, 15, frankly, it sucked. It was not good. But you know what? In working, and we're working on things now, which I've personally hand audited some of those, it is a 90% improvement. And that's what they don't see, is that there are some doctors that just want to stamp people out, crack them and rack them and bill for it. There are still that in our profession. I see it all the time. But there's more than that. Good doctors who frankly just don't know what they don't know, and whether it's ignorance or lack of motivation or no money, whatever, they don't get help, or they get help from the wrong people, and then they find themselves in trouble. So there is a documentation problem. I think that in trying to get it clarified, like what is exactly what it should be, and then teach that, which is what we've all been trying to do these last 3 or 4 years with Medicare. What's awful is for me to be at FCA in Orlando, and there are 10 documentation teachers, and I'm the 5th one, and I get told that what I said was different than the first 4, and the first 4 I've never even heard of before. That is frustrating, not only for me, but for the doctors as well. Well, who do I listen to? Who do I trust?
Yeah, there's a lot of bad information out there, to be sure. And one of the things I appreciate about what you guys do is that there are statutes you point to, and wherever that's found in the Medicare materials to support what it is you're telling me. So that's very solid, and I know that that's appreciated by me, and I know a lot of us in the profession, because unfortunately, a lot of it is the grapevine training system, and a lot of us have come from that.
It's true. It's true. And I think what's interesting about it is I tend to liken it to, it's 55 mile an hour speed limit. So how fast are you going to be? What if you're a 65 mile an hour? I mean, that's not the end of the world. You can get in with traffic. You probably would never be caught. You're willing to take that risk. It's 10 miles over. But it's the outliers, the people that are going 100 or weaving in and out of traffic, that are probably going to be the ones that get caught. And that's kind of what happens with our profession as well.
Well, let me ask you about this, because I hear this a lot too. These two things, they're different, but they are kind of the same attitude. They'll say, well, I don't have to worry about all that stuff, thank goodness, because I'm cash. Oh. And I hear that one, or I'll hear this. Well, Medicare and parts, and in my philosophical view, I'm going to adjust where that subluxation is. How can you speak to those two things in terms of documentation?
Certainly. So if I'm a cash-based practice, more power to you. I think that's great. However, the Medicare rules state that you can't touch a Medicare patient unless you are properly enrolled in Medicare. Now, if you're doing it properly, you're enrolled as a non-participating provider. You are billing on behalf of the patient, sending the bills in, paper, electronic, depending, on behalf of the patient as you're required to do. So cash-based practice still may have to do that, and that is okay. If you are strictly a cash-based practice that says, I don't want to deal with Medicare, then the correct action is you turn them away. and you let them go somewhere else, and you're Johnny on the spot, no problem there. However, you have to remember that there are, in my mind, 4 layers of documentation. The first documentation is documenting to simply be a good doctor and to have asked the right questions and to clinically perform your duties. If somebody's got a blood pressure off the charts, you're obligated by your licensure to talk about it. Doesn't mean you're going to cure it, but do you send them back to their doctor? What does that mean? The next level is your board. Most every state board has a guideline for documentation standards. In the absence of those, Medicare is a great example to use. And under those circumstances, what I think is great is just utilizing, knowing that you're at least meeting that. So your cash patients, your maintenance patients of that nature can perhaps be that lower level of scrutiny on the documentation. Then you need to be sure you're documenting to what your malpractice carrier would have you do, which is to make sure you're getting the right information down, because you could find yourself in a pickle. Then and only then are we finished with if I'm a cash-based practice, because now I've got coding and documentation and medical necessity issues to deal with if I'm indeed engaging with a third party. So what I try to tell them is, yes, you can be a cash-based practice, but that doesn't absolve you from the basics. You may not have to go into all the gory detail, but you're expected to be a good doctor, meet your board requirements, and protect your fanny.
Well, that lays it out. That really does. There's just a lot going on there. Even if you, and let me ask you this. I've had, before I was ever accepting insurance, and this isn't Medicare, this was just regular insurance. I was a cash-based practice and I would do a super bill at the end. But there were times when an out-of-network provider would request my notes. Mm-hmm. And I was doing a good job then, thank goodness. So my patient was able to get paid or reimbursed, but that may not have been the case, I don't think, if I would have had substandard notes.
Correct. And part of that problem is it can also open a can of worms where one shouldn't be, because at that point, if you're providing a super bill, while granted you may have been paid at the time of service and you're not waiting for your money, if there isn't proper diagnosis and proper medical necessity established, then in fact you are going to perhaps have a problem, or the patient can't get reimbursed. The other thing is that I participated with an issue here in Colorado with the Attorney General's office, where an insurance company turned a doctor in to the board, and then they've been investigating for years and years, and I was called in to review documentation and coding. And one of the things that happened there was that the doctor was actually out of network, but with one of the plans, but people were submitting these outrageous bills. And unfortunately, the doctor was in no less hot water from his board than anybody else would have been, because the documentation was so substandard. And this guy's probably going to lose his license over it.
Boy, yeah, that's tough. I mean, you make such an investment in that license. And
I know. Well, and the worst part is honestly this, and I say this with a tongue a little bit in my cheek, is that I hear, because we talk to so many doctors and we have so many clients, that they will say, I didn't learn this in school. This is not what I learned in school. They just taught us these basics in school, etc. Or nobody's ever sat down and really explained this to me. We just took on a doctor in a state that's gotten in trouble with his license and has these required things he has to do, and they've hired us as their monitor, so we're going to do training with them. But even as we started working with him, it was, well, I've never even heard of this stuff before. So my question always is, but doesn't your state have a documentation requirement every year to get your hours? Like, why? What are you doing? Are you the guy in the back watching a movie? What's going on here?
Yep, and I think that's probably is what's happening. What's happening. They're going in excited about adjusting or other things, but when it comes to documentation, people think, well, I'll do the time, but they're not absorbing what they need to. Unfortunately, I've seen it when I've been in those documentation courses.
Well, and just to your point about the expanded process, I would say this last piece of that, where we're struggling so much with the issues around just documenting 3 codes. My fear is that if we enter into the process of now coding E&M services and therapies with the same reckless abandon that we're doing for the 3 codes, I worry about that. My hope is that what happened in 1997 when the new CMT codes came out will happen then, which is just a series of documentation seminars that are practically required by the carriers, so that the doctors will have to go pass a test at the end or something, so that there's some sort of urgency put upon it. That's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, and I think that if that happens, along with what's happening, just sort of the changing of the guard in terms of the old school chiropractors, and I say this with complete respect for them, but a lot of people who were in the Mercedes 80s and 90s and beyond are reaching retirement age, and the newer group coming in, I think the rules are different now, and whereas before you're trying to get the other people to sort of change the way they've always done things. I think it's easier to get a new group coming up correctly and trained correctly from the get-go. And I'm hoping that over the next 10 years or so, the profession will start to sort of evolve that way.
Yes.
Well, let's switch gears here. So let's take a step back from Kathy Mills Chang, KMC University, compliance, all of that stuff. And let's just talk about you. And this can be both business, I guess, but it could be personal as well. Is there any failure or challenge or obstacle that you have had, and we all have, so think of one that was really the biggest you've ever had that you've overcome, and just some of the wisdom, the way, what you learned from it, how you overcame those things for you personally.
I think this is a great question, and it's probably hard for me to pin down one thing, but I can say that the couple of things that came to my mind, I think, are this. I have experienced, unfortunately, a lot of issue in my professional life, mostly because I'm a woman in a man's world. And it's interesting because of all the Me Too stuff, which I really don't find myself in that, camp, for the lack of a better word. But I do know that there are a lot of people in this profession who are female who have experienced what I've experienced. And frankly, I'm not a feminist. I'm very middle of the road on most everything I believe in and live with. But what's interesting to me is how often, for example, you were at NCLC. I was at one not long ago, and they called all the chiropractors of the year up on the stage, and there were 15 people, all men. I'm thrilled to see the women that are kind of coming up through the ranks now, and there'll be a female president here shortly, which will be great. But what I find so interesting is that literally, I, without boasting, can say that my knowledge base I would put up against any person who teaches what I teach in this profession. And there have been so many times where I've been dismissed for no reason at all, other than either I'm not a doctor or I'm not a man. And I know that to be true. So in the not a doctor side, the way I overcame it was that I went out and got certified in a lot of different things, so that where a chiropractor might have, I went to school and became a chiropractor, I at least have, but I'm certified in these things that I'm trying to teach you, which I felt brought credential or brought something to the table, right?
Right.
And so I think that has helped by all means. But for me personally, because I think we all need a coach, and I have my own coach, and when that comes up or I feel that way, I'm not a super pushy person, but I certainly am not afraid to speak up. And I think that when I've experienced those things, especially the last few years, I just call it out. And there have been times when people have gone, you know what? Yeah, I get that. And other times, again, old school, you're just going to run into that problem. But I would say that lack of being a DC in this profession, or lack of being a male, frankly, it has had its effects.
Yeah. Well, I just kind of shows my cluelessness, because that answer took me by surprise. I wasn't expecting that, because it just doesn't cross my mind.
I know, right?
I'm just so excited to learn from anybody. I'm not thinking about anything else, man, woman, I don't care.
And it's interesting because a lot of it actually is from who should be colleagues. And so that's kind of sad. But, I certainly don't sit around and suck my thumb about it by any stretch of the imagination. On a personal side, I really think that when I think of the word failure or challenge, frankly, the one thing that I think about is, I've been married a few times. And while they have not all been particularly, horrible situations that, running for my life or anything like that, I was talking about this recently with somebody about how I feel like I have learned from every single one of my situations, whatever they are. And even in not having, marriage the way that I might like it to be, I learned so much about it to get to where I am now. I think you know my story where I reconnected with my high school sweetheart. I've been very happily married now for 9 years. And, that's just evidence that dreams come true, and what you go through teaches you what you need for when you're ready to receive it. So I feel very strongly that is how it has gone. And when I think about something not being ideal, I guess that really is probably the one thing that comes to my mind, that it wasn't the White House picket fence, because I'm also kind of a breadwinner, which is also weird, in the world where the woman's not, so I've been kind of around peg in a square hole a little bit anyway. But I think that probably is the main thing that's come to my mind besides the professional challenge.
Well, who are your heroes?
In chiropractic or in general, or?
Yeah, in life.
Well, I have probably 3 or 4 people in my life, some of which extend over into chiropractic. One of the doctors that I worked for a number of years while I lived in Arizona, Dr. Ed Weathersby, is someone that I grew to be very, very close to. And when I think about opening the dictionary and looking for, best human being I know, his picture's going to be there. Just in what makes him a hero to me is how he tries to show up for his family, for his practice, for his patients, for his profession. He's been in many different leadership positions in this profession, and I think that that's amazing. Another chiropractic hero of mine is Dr. Ray Foxworth, who owns ChiroHealth USA. There are a lot of people that don't see what happens behind the scenes with this man, not only the millions of dollars that he's donated back to the profession of our patients' money, by the way, but, somebody's office burns down and he's striking a check.
Wow.
Nobody ever knows. And I know because I'm, work so closely with him. But he is the epitome of kind of who you ought to be in this world,
Yeah.
legitimately. And, I would say a third person is my son, who is 28, been to hell and back in a lot of ways, and is, one of these kids that just keeps on fighting and climbing up the wall, with his fingernails, and slides down a little bit and doesn't give up, brushes himself off and tries again. And, I think in today's world, I would not give all the tea in China to be 28 years old today. and when I watch what he goes through and how he tries to do it on his own and not ask for help, it's miraculous for me.
Yeah. Boy, there's a lot there. I can tell you, I have this theory that the word life should be replaced with struggle. Yeah. And I don't mean that and as a downer. I mean it because it's more accurate. Instead of saying, hey, how's life? You could say, how's your struggle? Because we all have one. And it's really, comes down to how we're dealing with it and overcoming it. So that's kind of why I ask these questions, because we all are sort of, whatever it happens to be, it is. You got to wake up and you got to push through and still win the day regardless of what comes at you.
You bet.
Well, let me ask you this, and we'll end on this particular question. But what is the best business advice you've ever received?
That's a great question. I don't know if I would call it advice because I kind of stumbled on it myself, but I'm sure I heard about it somewhere. There is a business model that is called the Entrepreneurial Operating System, EOS model, that was kind of put together by Gino Wickman and is outlined in a book called Traction. And essentially, it's not anything that you or I probably haven't heard 100 times from Covey and Lencioni and all these different things. But he took all these concepts and put them together into a model of how it is the DNA of the way you run your business. So it is the way that our infrastructure works, the way our accountability chart works, the way our meetings work, all of it. And it is an amazing system. And probably starting that, working through trying to implement it on our own was a bit of a struggle. And then after about a year, deciding to actually hire a professional implementer to come and work with us a bit to polish off the edges and really get us in the mode. It has allowed me to truly step into my role that I may be really good at coaching people and reading documentation and all those things, but I am only one person who can only help so many people. And if I continue to have to be that person, then ultimately we can't help as many people as we want to and meet our goal this year, which is to single-handedly assist in lowering the chiropractic error rate one office at a time. So for me to do that, I have to step into my true visionary role and be who I need to be so that my team can run the day-to-day and I can be in the places that I need to be and not trying to do everything. So through that process and the advice I got around that process and the struggle it really is, I'm setting my third deadline of July 1st to be out of day-to-day again. And this time is the third time's a charm kind of thing. But by the time I get there, I just think that's probably the very best thing I could possibly do, not only for my business, but for our business who we help, because it limits what we can do when everything has to go through me.
That's great advice. And I am going to go check that book out. And these days I do Audible books because I don't have time to actually sit down and read anything.
I do too. I love it. Yes. And you'll love it on there. You will. It's excellent. And actually there's another one called Get a Grip and one called Rocket Fuel, which is kind of about the integrator visionary relationship that drives the process. And they're excellent. You're going to love them.
Well, what's the best way for everybody to get a hold of you if they want to find out more about what you do and where you're going to be speaking next?
So our website is just the name of our company, kmcuniversity.com. You may also see in this year nomorecompliance.com, no with a K, because that kind of follows the KMC mantra, where many of our additional compliance things kind of fall under that heading on the things that we do with general business or outside of chiropractic. KMCuniversity.com has an events page to show where I'll be at all times. Info at kmcuniversity.com is the very simple email address that can be used if you'd ever like a demonstration of our library or to get a question answered, and we can get you hooked up right away.
Well, Kathy, always a pleasure chatting with you. Thanks so much for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.